Hey everybody, and welcome to Line Rider. What you just saw was just a sort of small unfinished track that at some point I thought I could turn into a full YouTube Let's Play, but I actually dropped very quickly. But I still wanted to make this video and put it somewhere because Fraps files are huge and I didn't want to let this go to waste and disappear until the end of time, so here goes as a sort of trying to save a bit of work that I did for some reason that I never ended up doing anything with. So it's a bit weird, I guess, to see me making Line Rider videos. So just a bit of an introduction to why this is happening, I suppose. I've always been interested in Line Rider, and I've played it a lot when I was in high school. Obviously, I think a lot of people have sort of had that experience. And I never really let go of it too much. I always found myself kind of returning to it every now and then, like every once in 2 years or something, kind of like how I've been coming back to Minecraft in a sense. But recently this game has absolutely blown up, and I also realized that it actually has a Discord server and somewhat active Reddit page and very much a vibrant community, much more than you'd expect for a game of this size and a game this old, and hell, really a game that's not even so much a game. And this is where maybe I kind of feel some similarities with what kind of communities that I've been in before, because it feels super similar to the communities of games like Rollercoaster Tycoon 3, especially Rollercoaster Tycoon 3 in the time that I was in that community, because it's the same kind of really small, everyone knows each other, and they're taking the game from a completely different point of view from what it was originally intended into this whole kind of new creative tool. And that's very much something that I also saw happening with Rollercoaster Tycoon 3. And I just think it's really interesting to have these kinds of communities that take these very simple games or toys and just take them way too far. I remember seeing some of the best Line Rider tracks of 2016 and 2017. These are videos on YouTube by, I believe it was Rabbit Squirrel who made them, and they've sort of been discovered by the general audience who only played Line Rider in high school times, and it sort of opened their eyes to what this game has become, but also shows you just how much this game has sort of alienated the community from the rest of well, the players of Line Rider who sort of casually do it, because in the years that they've sort of been on their own in their own little community developing their techniques and everything in this game, it's become so insanely difficult to sort of get along with what they're doing and try to learn all of their tricks that they've come up with throughout the years, because it's just taken the game to a whole nother level. And I'm trying my best to sort of do some of that stuff over here, and I'm gonna try to maybe also kind of explain some of the stuff that I'm doing here, I suppose. But really, in the end, it's really difficult to do that. This community is just gone insane. But so far, what I've been doing is just very simple, basic stuff, making what they call manuals. The so-called nose manual and the tail manual, where the nose manual is where you balance the rider. He's called Bosch, by the way, on his nose, and, well, not the nose of the guy on the sled, but on the nose of the sled. And the tail manual, likewise, is when you balance him on the tail. And the nose manual is a lot easier, so you might notice that I'm doing a lot of nose manuals here, and I'm just sort of keeping him in that position very simply, because once you get him into a perfectly balanced nose manual, as long as you don't like throw him off balance, he's gonna stay in that nose manual no matter what you do. So it's a very easy sort of thing to get him to balance on. Whereas his tail, there's not really so much of a sort of gravitational point where the center of gravity is gonna allow him to stay on his tail. So when you're putting him on his tail, you have to keep balancing the guy entirely throughout the ride. And the way that you can do this is with some of those red lines. So a very, very basic explanation of how Line Rider works for the people who aren't initiated into this at all. You can let the guy on the sled ride over the lines, and when it comes to lines, there are 3 types. There's green lines, which he doesn't ride over at all. He can touch these. Well, it doesn't really do anything. These are usually just referred to as scenery lines. A lot of people use them to kind of draw scenery around the track. There are blue lines, which have a black part at the top and a blue part at the bottom. So the rider can sort of slide over these lines on the black part, but only if the black part is on top. So if the blue part were on top, then he would just sort of fall through these if you were falling from above. So he can go through these lines if he's entering from the blue side, and he rides on top of these lines if he's entering from the black side. And the same kind of goes for the red lines, but the red lines have an additional sort of feature. They accelerate or decelerate, depending on which direction the lines go, the rider. And these red lines are super important for manuals because they're a good way to get the rider to balance. Because if you're, for instance, balancing him on his tail and he starts to fall forward, you can accelerate him with a red line and he'll sort of start falling backward again, and you could sort of balance him this way, and vice versa, of course. And here we're getting into an interesting tidbit, which is using the sort of bottom of the lines, because aside from allowing the rider to go through these parts of the lines, they also have a very small sort of attractor field. And this is also the gray box that you can see underneath the lines, which is normally not visible, but this version of Line Rider, called Line Rider Advanced, allows you to see these gray boxes, which really helps with trying to get him to levitate using these lines. Because as long as any of the so-called contact points of the rider, and these can be parts of his sled or his arms or anything that is allowed to come into contact with the lines that the game sort of uses to calculate what he's coming into contact with. If any of these points are in this grey box, and the grey box itself is sort of going into another direction than the rider himself is, then the rider will be pulled towards the line. And that's why you can see all of those small little blue lines trying to pull the rider up, and this is sort of giving you that gravitational effect, which I was doing just now. And these are commonly called gravity wells, and there's a whole slew of types of gravity wells, honestly. This was just a very simple gravity chain, which is just a chain of very small gravity wells that sort of pull the rider up in very small increments to create this sort of floating, flying sensation. But there are many different types of gravity wells that I couldn't even begin to explain or even try to make in a track. Over here, I was just trying to make a very simple track with some simple tricks, synchronized to music, by the way, in the meantime. And the basic idea was to just theme it eventually. So here we're getting into the theming, and I wanted to practice with a Japanese garden style theme. So you can see I'm using all of the green lines, which the rider goes through, as scenery lines, and then you can see the blue lines and the red lines, which are the lines that he actually rides on. Now the look of the game sort of changed for a bit as I'm trying to also discover what kind of features this has, because keep in mind this is my first track that I am building with this version of Line Rider, and it's one of the first tracks that I've built in this game in years. So I'm just trying to come to terms with it again. But I'm using this style of, well, preview graphics, which make the lines sort of light up as soon as he touches them, which allows you to see which lines is he actually riding, and which lines that I drew is he skipping, so could I remove. And it also just helps a little bit with the visuals, because it makes it a bit more clear where are the lines that he's riding and where I can actually draw some stuff. So I just drew a very simple Japanese pine tree sort of sticking out from the cliffside there, which he's riding on for the first part of the track, and then doing some rock work and some grass and some simple foliage all around that to create a sort of Japanese garden theme around it. And yeah, the start of the track is quite simple, quite fast paced though. A few nose manuals, then it goes down on the slope on the nose manual, then it sort of flips upside down on the other side, does a tail manual, goes into a small gravity well where it gets pulled backwards and goes in another nose manual. So yeah, altogether, for line rider terms, this is a super simple sort of way of doing things. These are some of the most basic tricks that you have, but honestly this is just about what I can do and make it look decent in the meantime. Now, if I'm gonna start my Let's Play on my main channel, I'm probably gonna use the smaller scenery lines, which have also been a recent addition. These are the full-size scenery lines, and it makes it a bit hard to make super detailed scenery, because as you can see the lines are quite thick compared to how large the rider himself is, so there's not a lot of detail in the scenery. There's a few pine trees over there, and there's a shrub, and there's some rock work. But while I think this has been a good practice to sort of get used to the style and actually really find my own style, because I'm also trying my best to not rip off some of the line rider greats here, I think it would be better to sort of work with the more narrow scenery lines and try to get a bit more detail in. Oh, and speaking of the greats, one of my biggest inspirations and reasons probably why I keep coming back to this game is a YouTube channel called TechDog, who made some of the most classic line rider tracks ever, like Transcendence and Make Believe. It's a beautiful collection of amazingly well-themed tracks. Honestly, what's kind of strange, and I believe this was also talked about in a Rabbit Squirrel video, is that scenery tracks used to be sort of the bread and butter of line rider videos, right? There are sort of two main ways to distinguish line rider tracks. There are the sort of the scenery tracks, which are focused on creating scenery and creating this sort of fantastic landscape for the sled rider to go through. And then there are technique tracks, or what they also often call quirk, which is tracks that are just trying to glitch out the rider in the most insane ways, follow up multiple kinds of gravity wells and manuals and all kinds of tricks together, and not so much focus on scenery. Obviously there are some tracks that do both, that sort of feature an insanely difficult to make track and then add some scenery to it, but generally these are the two focuses. And while Line Rider really started out as a very much a scenery focused community, and some of the biggest classic videos are all very scenery based, over the years the community seemed to gravitate toward quirk and make more of these quirky, glitchy tracks full of gravity wells and insane tricks. And then in recent years, especially following Doodle Chaos's Half the Mountain King, I believe it was, video, which sort of went viral on Reddit when it was posted there, that sort of started the trend of synchronizing stuff to music. So with this track, I'm sort of trying to pay homage to all of these things, trying to make a track that, you know, could work on its own without any scenery, but then also build it in such a way that I can add scenery to it and make it a scenery focused track, while at the same time also trying to sing some music to it. And I was thinking of already making this the topic of the YouTube series, but I think I can honestly do a little bit better. So for my next one, I'm trying to make the track a bit more impressive, add more detailed scenery, and have a better soundtrack. Because as much as I like the track so far and the soundtrack that's very peaceful and tranquil, it works out quite alright, I think. But it's something which could be a little bit better. I should also say what's interesting now. It used to be the case that Line Rider was a super basic game and you didn't really have all of these different tools that I have now. Especially the copy-paste tool, which allows you to take scenery and just copy-paste that anywhere. Also kind of shift the size and the shape and everything of it. Stuff like that is completely new, and really it's going to be a massive help when it comes to making tracks like these. If I do make this kind of series on my channel, I would like to just make a set of trees and bushes and stuff like that, and then just copy it around and see what that ends up looking like in the end. It might not be the most, well, unique looking, because you can definitely probably tell at some point that trees are going to repeat and stuff, but I think it would just be the best because it would be way too time consuming and it would be less interesting to watch me keep drawing the same tree over and over again. And hell, this very idea of trying to take my sort of time-lapse based commentary let's play format and trying to apply it to Line Rider is a bit of a sort of new thing as well, so yeah, consider this video also a bit of a test to see how well this format actually works with this game. I think it works quite alright. There's quite a lot to talk about, you know. There's quite a lot to talk about that I'm even ignoring, like right now, adding all of this foliage and how that sort of works and what some of my inspirations for that was. Interestingly, I sort of based this style on my way of doodling. Sometimes I doodle in class and the way I'm drawing here is very much influenced by that. It's just sort of pen strokes and quick little brushes to make trees and stuff like that. So not super detailed, but more sort of getting the idea across, getting a very basic idea of a tree or bush or something like that across, really. In any case, that's it for this episode. I'll leave you with another replay of what the track looked like in the end. But I'm gonna have to say I'm probably gonna abandon this project and hopefully get into a slightly better looking one for my main channel eventually. So yeah, I hope to see you guys then. I hope this was maybe a bit fun to watch anyway. And yeah, see you later.